Hi everyone, my name is Joanne McCafferty and I'm an antiquities trafficking student at the University of Glasgow, studying for my Master of Science postgraduate course entitled Collecting and Provenance Studies in an International Context. And today I'm going to be discussing provenance, evidence, recording and the social life of things. According to Gail Feigenbaum and Ingo Reist, provenance, firmly entrenched though it may be as a standard part of our art historical research today, is neither stable as a concept nor constant as an instrument. It is evident that throughout our history, things can become obscured. This is true when we consider the true biography of the cultural objects we attempt to enforce provenance onto. This obscuring of provenance could occur through theft, as with the stolen Van Gogh paintings, which until a few months ago were missing from the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam for 14 years, through discourses of copying artworks such as Marc Antonio Raimondi's direct copies of Albrecht Dürer's engravings, or when cultural institutions adopt the provenance of another cultural object through the production of a replica, as with the replica of the cave temples of Dong Huang, currently on exhibition at the Getty Research Center in Los Angeles. Actually recently ended, sorry. In his paper entitled Science and the Judgments by Eye in the Historical Identification of Works of Art, Martin Kemp details the art historical approach to evidence as well as the scientific. It is apparent from his article that these two traditions should be considered together, and such evidence should be cross-referenced in order to formulate a more well-rounded and reliable narrative surrounding an artwork and its authentication or falsification. There is also a suggestion throughout his writings that the scientific evidence we now have access to naturally provides primary sources of evidence re provenience, whilst the observer, connoisseur / art historian provides secondary evidence as there's too much variability in their deductions to constitute concrete evidence for authentication. This side of evidential material for the discovery of a provenance now encompasses many more disciplines which act to provide a social understanding of an object from its original construction to its current state. This encompasses the comprehension of external forces to the cultural object in order to facilitate an understanding of its social life. Considering this particular case of the two Van Gogh paintings, I found it interesting on a couple of levels. One, it demonstrates how there can be a gap in provenance through art theft. We may never know what happened to these paintings during the 14-year period that were missing from Amsterdam. And secondly, it demonstrates the differing value of art to the private and more specifically the illicit art market and the public, more specifically the museum from which it was taken. In the statement issued by the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, they state the art historical value of the paintings for the collection is huge. Seascape is the only painting in our museum collection dating from Van Gogh's period in The Hague, 1881 to 1883. It is one of the only two seascapes that he painted during his years in the Netherlands, and it is a striking example of Van Gogh's early style of painting, already showing his highly individual character. The hope for a forthcoming return of the seascape will fill an important gap in the museum presentation. On the other hand, the official FBI website, when detailing the Van Gogh Museum robbery, stated in December 2002, two thieves used a ladder to climb to the roof and break into the Vincent van Gogh Museum, Amsterdam, the Netherlands. In just a few minutes, the thieves stole two paintings, Van Gogh's view of the sea at Scheveningen and Congregation leaving the Reformed Church in Nuenen, valued at $30 million. Dutch police convicted two men in December 2003, but did not recover the paintings. This then demonstrates the monetary value and motive of the robbery. Once taken outside the context of the museum, the object assumed a new value. In its then current context, in the hands of an illicit market, the paintings had only monetary value, but in the context of the museum, both regained their cultural value, complementing a narrative of Van Gogh's life and having greater cultural significance. Mainly, Provenance focuses not on the aesthetic style biography of the object or cultural implications, but on the exchange of ownership, in order to provide an alternative history of an object that can dictate and account for its movement from place of origin to its current state. However, for me, this record of provenance, which dictates only the order of ownership, does not provide a complete provenance of any given object. The cultures of collecting, cultural objects are forever entering new cultural frameworks, which brings forth new functions in that given object. It is evident that when placed in the context of a museum, the majority of the time and the majority of the visitors of that museum, the original function and purpose of an artwork or cultural object is rendered irrelevant. This is the case not just when a cultural object is removed from its whole or original context, for example, a fragment from an archaeological site or cultural heritage site, as it immediately loses its relevance and identity. But with any object, in fact, sorry. When placed in a new context, even if it is a standalone painting, that context is changed and for the most part forgotten, as those who see it view it in an environment which erases the contextualization of the object, obscuring its background to adopt the new museum aesthetic. Such museums also impose their own cultural preconceptions and backgrounds to their viewing of the art, and such new cultural appropriations that an object may go through, I feel, is significant to the study of its provenance in order to understand the social life of that cultural object. This notion of the biography dates back to Kopytov, 1986. He understood objects as not being static in their new context of museums or a private collection, but recognized this as part of their ever-changing identity of the object. Not only, not only do objects change through their existence, but they often have the capability of accumulating histories so that the present significance of an object derives from the persons and events to which it is connected. End quote. Feigenbaum and Reist state objects can be understood only through looking at the cultural context which originally produced them and the new circumstances into which they later moved. The histories of many objects are composed of shifts of context and perspective. End quote. I find this quote interesting when taking into consideration the case of the Philips Knink painting held within the Hunterian, which was for so long assumed to be a Rembrandt. The painting in question is entitled Panoramic Landscape, circa 1665. The provenance is as follows. It was bequeathed by Dr. William Hunter in 1783, and thereafter the provenance is undocumented, but it was probably purchased for £17, 6 pence at the sale of Mr. Blackwood's pictures at Langford's on 18th to 19th of March 1756 for under lot 54, titled Rembrandt, A Large Sea Landscape. Knink of Rotterdam relocated to Amsterdam following his marriage around 1640. It was at this time that he may have worked at Rembrandt's studio. However, contrary to many writings, it is assumed that Rembrandt was not Knink's master. Nonetheless, he did certainly appear to have been a part of Rembrandt's circle of friends, and this friendship caused an obvious exchange of visual communication, which in turn led to Knink painting the style of Rembrandt, apparent in this loose brushwork and use of warm colours, evident in his painting. With further research into the provenance of this particular object, in the light of new means of testing authenticity of objects, we are able to uncover its true history. Assumptions were made initially with regard to the authorship of this particular painting on plausible grounds due to the location of origin and general aesthetic, However, now that we have authorial knowledge of the painting, we're now able to understand the relation between the prior assumed artist of Rembrandt and the true one of Philips Crank. It is evident that this mistaken provenance, when initially purchased by Hunter, has contributed to its current location and prominent display within the art gallery collection nowadays. It is placed in conjunction with a painting by Rembrandt van Rijn entitled The Entombment, as well as alongside the study of the head of an old man by Peter Paul Rubens, thereby anchoring him to the Dutch tradition and that particular style of artistic output. And so the mistaken provenance becomes part of this collective narrative of the Hunter collection, contributing to their individual object biographies. Historian is able to consider the political, social, and cultural influences or appropriations embedded in the narrative of a painting, for example, in order to inform us of its provenance and original purpose. And the art historian understands that this original function, whatever its agency, alters whenever the object is placed within a new context and or new cultural frameworks. This is most definitely the case when it comes to the identification of Chinese painting or calligraphy work, in that those who collected the cultural object embedded their own identification in the artwork with the imprinting of their collector's seal. The collector may also have left an inscription detailing his positive thoughts on the work of the artist, um, and the identification of the seal would inform of the provenance of the artwork. Such collectors were usually emperors or government officials. A perfect example of an instance where the cultural practice of a country in the context of art is able to inform a provenance, and the evidence does not only lie detached from the cultural object, but can become that object. This opens up a two-way street between the object and those who collect it, as provenance consequently impacts on the cultural biography of the object, whilst the previous ownership increases its value. A reciprocal relationship is therefore formed between cultural objects and owner. In terms of how such provenance is recorded, we can look at the Met's official website detailing Guoxi of the Northern Song Dynasty, Old Trees, Level Distance, circa 1080. From considering this catalogue entry, we can see that the Met has given two separate categories for the discussion of seals and inscriptions, and then provenance, including only that of the previous owner in the latter section. I feel that this should be demonstrated differently, as inscriptions and seals speak of the narrative surrounding that cultural object, and so should be categorized as such. So to conclude, I feel that I have expressed Feigenbaum and Rice's point that, quote, the central idea is that as people and objects gather time, movement, and change, they are constantly transformed, and these transformations of person and object are tied up with each other, end quote. We have established from Martin Kemp's article that there is a constant dialogue between that of the art historical and scientific evidence in relation to the establishment of provenance. Such evidential components require communication in order to produce a more reliable historical account of any cultural object. With the culmination of multidisciplinary research, provenance, I believe, can account for the social life of things rather than a mere account of changes in ownership. It is apparent that people and cultural objects have mutual biographies, which develop in culturally specific ways depending on their current context. Each cultural object I have discussed today has or will soon enter into an environment defined by public service, educative value, cultural preservation, intellectual stimulation, etc. And with museum practice being to have knowledge of provenance and record in a manner, a cataloguing manner, which the public have access to, the entire history of each cultural object, now in the new context of the museum, becomes eternally attached to its social life, as well as the cultural life of the country or city it is held within. Thank you very much for your time.